Ulverscroft and Boldwood present A Vintage Vacation, written by Maddie Please and read by Penelope Freeman. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. I'd worked for XS, Finance with Heart, for over 20 years. We were a perfect fit. I'd risen through the ranks to become senior business manager, and the next step up was director. Which, on paper, shouldn't have been difficult, because as far as I could see, the board was filled with pompous nitwits, more concerned with their golf and latest cars than business. Not that that stopped them steaming in at the 11th hour and claiming all the credit, when in fact other people like me had sorted out all the difficulties of a deal. That morning I stood in front of the mirror in the executive cloakroom, smoothing down the jacket of my scarlet suit. It stood out so well amidst the sea of grey that usually filled the boardroom. My hair was in its usual tight French pleat, my makeup perfect. I rummaged in my bag to find my trademark Rouge Amazon lipstick and applied a fresh layer. If Nick Crane, director of HR, wanted a chat, then I was ready. My instinct, one that had been growing over the last few weeks, was that he was going to escalate the process he had mentioned during the staff fun sports day and tofu extravaganza in Crawley. I was next in line for promotion. They were going to offer me a seat on the board. Now that the Olafsson contract was millimetres away from agreement and signature, it would be the perfect time. It had been one of the biggest deals XS had ever done, and my stamp was all over it. I blotted my lipstick with a tissue. It was 4 minutes to 8 o'clock, exactly enough time to get the lift up to the 14th floor, where Nick Crane had a glass-walled office filled with his many meaningless awards and photos of himself with some of the other directors, playing golf or in executive boxes at Twickenham. On my way to the executive lift, I passed a couple of people who moved aside, respectfully murmuring, "Good morning, Miss Harrington." I gave them a polite smile and hurried on. I tried to bite back a little thrill of excitement. This was it then, the moment for which I had worked so hard for so many years. I'd known for a while that Howard Leeming was planning to step down from his post as director of business. There was only so much information that could be hidden in a company the size of XS. And Nina, my secretary, was a hotline to office gossip. I reached Nick Crane's floor and took a deep breath. Sheila, his PA, was waiting behind her desk, the gatekeeper. She barely glanced at me. "Good morning, Miss Harrington. I think you can go straight in," she said, after the obligatory 10-second wait for her to stop typing and look up from her laptop. Nick Crane was sitting at his vast blonde wood desk, fiddling with some papers and files in front of him. "Clover," he said warmly, as though I was the only person in the world he'd been wanting to see, which was unlikely. He stood up and came forward to shake my hand, which in itself was unusual. "Sit down. Can I get you coffee, tea, mineral water, almond croissant?" I shook my head. "No, I'm fine, thanks." "Big muffin?" Yes, you are, I thought, tasteless and full of hot air. "No, nothing, thanks," I smiled sweetly. I went to sit down, my heels catching in the thick pile carpet, so that I stumbled a little and had to catch hold of the back of the chair. I cursed. Why, at moments like this one, did I have to be such a klutz? I really was safer sitting down behind a desk. "Good, good," Nick said, as he sat down again, steepling his fingers in front of him and giving a huge sigh. "Clover, Clover, Clover. I have a few things to discuss. None of them easy, and none of them can go beyond these 4 walls for now. Is that okay?" "Of course," I said, folding my hands in my lap and adopting a professional expression. He slapped his hands down on the desk in front of him. "Well, I won't beat about the bush. XS, Finance with Heart, is being taken over. Yes, I know it's a shock. It's going to be a shock to all the little people.
XS has been in their sights for a while now. It's an American company and the deal will be finalised on Friday.
I'll admit I was completely polaxed. None of this had reached my ears, or Nina's, which was astonishing. How would this affect me, I wondered, my thoughts whirling. As one of the supposedly little people, how would things change? Perhaps it would mean more trips to America. I wouldn't mind that. Better than Scandinavia, where I'd spent a lot of time over the last year. It was a beautiful place and the people were lovely, but I'd been there in January. It was dark most of the time, and everything seemed so expensive. Really? I said. How interesting.
Isn't it? He said, with unnecessary emphasis.
I began to get my thoughts together and feel a tiny bit optimistic. I've a great pipeline, plenty of opportunities which could be very beneficial to the company. I've completed so many since I've headed up business I can't remember exactly. I noticed he had my personnel file open in front of him. Well, you can see in there it must be dozens. Perhaps he was looking so uncertain because he wanted me to transfer to a new office. New York or Washington, perhaps. I wouldn't mind that either. I was in a relationship that was going nowhere. My only son was living in Canada. Perhaps I'd be able to see him more often too, which would give me the chance to... He closed my file with a firm hand.
Well, you see, it's, not quite that simple, Clover.
For the first time, I felt a little chill of doubt.
You see, it's, Water Cheeseman Pole. They're the firm taking over.
I rummaged around in my memory banks. Water Cheeseman Pole. Yes, of course I'd heard of them. The name always made me imagine some Dairy Lee cheese triangles floating down a river in a punt. One of the biggest finance companies in New England. Maybe Boston, I thought. No, they were in Hartford, Connecticut. That's where a lot of finance and insurance companies were based. So perhaps I would end up there. How exciting, I said. What a marvellous opportunity.
I knew you'd understand, Nick continued. They'll be bringing in some of their best people to work here, deal with the handover while things get settled, and get rid of the dead wood in the company.
I nodded. Of course. I'd be happy to help with that, once I get the Olafson deal all wrapped up, and there are several other... Nick held up a hand.
You mustn't worry about that, Clover. I'm sure after all the pressures of the last few years, what with one thing and another, at your age, you'll appreciate having more time.
Time for what? I said, confused. By far the most infuriating part of that morning, and the thing I later couldn't unsee, was Nick Crane's shoes. Why did they bother me so much? I'd just been made redundant. I wasn't just one of what he had patronisingly called the little people, which was bad enough. I was also part of the dead wood. As I'd been escorted, shell-shocked, out of his office, I had hurried past the people waiting for the lifts, and he had followed me down several flights of stairs. Almost at the bottom, I had turned to remonstrate with him one last time. He had stopped too, standing several steps above me, presumably to keep as far away as possible from the disease of my downfall. His shoes were in my direct eye line. They were a bright chestnut brogue, the leather laces neatly threaded and tied in a prissy little bow. They were narrow, like little model canoes, polished as bright as a showroom car, and rather pointed. He had small feet for such a big, fat liar. I guessed, knowing Nick, they were new, Italian, and very expensive. I had an overwhelming urge to pull my lipstick out and draw a smiley face on them with Hermès Rouge Amazon, but of course I didn't. That would have been petty and undignified. We both stopped for a moment.
Sorry, Clover,
he said in a voice that said, I'm not sorry at all.
These things happen. There was nothing I could do. Trust me, I wrestled with the board on your behalf." An unpleasant image of him in a black wrestling singlet came to mind, and I felt a bit nauseous. "How kind of you to try, on my behalf," I said through stiff lips. "Yet here we are." "Now take care on the stairs, sweetheart. We don't want you to have a fall, do we?" He gave one of his smarmy smiles. He was enjoying this. I'd always known what an untrustworthy, sociopathic weasel Nick Crane was underneath his carefully tailored suits, overpowering aftershave and bright teeth. This was probably the most enjoyable thing he'd done since he caught his PA in the stockroom with a junior accountant at the Christmas party. "You're going to be such a great loss to excess," he said, as people dodged around us on the flashy steel and glass staircase leading to the front doors, their eyes averted, keen not to be dragged into this. The brown cardboard banker's box Nick was carrying for me spoke volumes. "I am, aren't I? Tell me, where I have made mistakes? Where have I let the company down?" He gave me a sad smile. "Oh, you would never do that, I know." Patronising git. "No, I know I haven't. I've brought in every deal I have ever made, except this last one, and I would have done. I can't imagine what you will do now with the Olufsen takeover," I said. I tapped my temple. "It's all in here." "Oh, I expect we'll manage," he said smoothly. "After all, we will have your laptop. I'm sure that'll help." "I hope—" I stopped. I had been going to say I hoped the rest of his life would morph into a long, disappointing nightmare, starting with his veneers falling out. But I didn't. "I hope you will look after Nina," I said. "She's an excellent secretary. She's invaluable." "Of course," he said, shuffling his vile footwear, eager to carry on with his task of escorting me out of the building like some sort of creepy nanny. I couldn't help myself. I rummaged in my handbag, pulled out my Rouge Amazon, and after giving him a furious look, daubed it all over the pointy toes of his shoes. He looked down in silent horror for a moment, and then he started to bluster. His voice became rather squeaky. My mother bought a birthday present." I clipped the top back onto my lipstick. "Perhaps next year she will buy you some Lego. Now come on, hurry up, there's a good boy." He hopped about for a moment, and then silently followed me, his mouth set in a nasty little line. As we reached the front doors, he put my pathetic box of possessions down with a meaningful thump and made a great play of winding the lanyard of my security card around his fingers. It was only 8:20 and people were still arriving at the excess offices for work. They looked at me sideways, curious. Schadenfreude, I suppose you could call it. Rather her than me. Nick Crane tried to hide his feet behind a potted palm. I looked around, wondering if I would see anyone else doing the walk of shame. No one. I picked up my box of possessions. It felt pathetically light. Over 20 years I had worked for XS, finance with heart. And all I had to take away with me was a porcelain mug, a manila envelope stuffed with redundancy documents, a leather pencil case Jack gave me for Christmas, 2 framed certificates, and a hideous glass award from last year's company event. I was 61. Shouldn't I have more to show for 22 years than that? I swallowed down my panic. Whatever happened, I was not going to cry in front of Nick Crane. But what was I going to do? I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't ready to retire. I loved my work. I always had. Without it, I was lost. No one was going to employ me now, not at my age, even though I felt and looked younger thanks to a lot of money and effort. I looked down at my newly manicured nails, which were immaculate.
trying to gain some comfort from them. I was effectively being retired against my will. To do what?
Well, that's it then,
Nick said, fishing in his pocket for a handkerchief and making feeble attempts to clean the lipstick off his shoes without falling over. He was 47. He had years left in front of him to fill with reports, complaints, and dismissal procedures. He would have been eager to get back to his glass-walled office and his brass plaque and his shelf full of stupid trophies, and start gleefully phoning around his friends to tell them how he had just ushered Clover Harrington out of the building, and adding embellishing details, no doubt. "Yes, I suppose so," I replied. My right eyelid was itching, but I wasn't going to scratch it in case he started a rumour that I had broken down in tears.
Well, there we go. Good luck with everything, and if there's anything I can do, you just have to ask, Nick said through his now gritted teeth.
He had recovered some of his composure by this time, although I didn't think his shoes would ever be quite the same again. Perhaps his mother would spend the evening digging out the lipstick with a cotton bud. I was suddenly very angry. I used to wipe the floor with boys like you, I thought. I still could. Just come out with me behind the office building to the smoker's lair and I'll smack the smile off your face in 5 minutes, you utter twat. His Ferragamo Oxford brogues would have been the least of his worries. I remembered when he started here, wet behind the ears and thinking he was Bill Gates. And yet he had somehow risen through the ranks to become director of HR, a living, breathing example of the Peter Principle, where people were shunted ever upwards in a corporation until they found a role where their incompetence wouldn't be noticed. "Just tell me the truth." "Why?" I said. He looked hunted for a fleeting second, and then his layers of professional smarm washed over him again.
"Just one of those things," he said. "Blame the Americans, you know what they're like."
I know what you're like, I thought. And we both knew the real reasons, although of course no one would have said them for fear of a lawsuit. The first glass ceiling in life was being a woman, only broken through with a lot of hard work, persistence and determination. The second glass ceiling was age, and that one seemed bulletproof. "You could open the door for me," I said, my voice very calm.
"Oh, of course,"
he said, darting forwards, his knees rather high, treading carefully around me. "How kind. I can't understand why everyone talks about you the way they do," I said, and gave him a frosty smile. His expression faltered as I walked past him and out into the world of the unemployed. Chapter 2. Outside the building, that spring morning was cold and crisp. There had been snow the previous week, and dirty clumps of it still hung around. I picked my way through to the taxi rank at the end of the street, passing people hurrying towards the building, ecologically friendly coffee cups in hand. They were starting their day, off to punch in numbers, pore over spreadsheets, have back-to-back meetings in various offices where everything would be discussed and nothing would be decided.
"Where are you going, Clover?"
someone shouted. I turned to see Jerry Sage, senior something or other. He was just arriving, a horrifying vision in red lycra and a stupid cycling helmet to match his stupid bike. I couldn't think of what to say, so I ignored him and just kept on walking. I went towards the taxi at the head of the line, the pedestrians parting on either side of me as I approached them, avoiding my gaze, carrying my distinctive banker's box. I felt like a leper ringing a bell. I was going home, back to my beautiful apartment overlooking the Thames, where I would sit in the quiet kitchen, make coffee with the complicated machine Jack had bought me for my birthday, and watch the traffic on the river. I thought of phoning Jack, but of course at that moment I couldn't. Nick had confiscated my work phone, and my personal one was left at home because I hardly ever needed it. I was a woman with no laptop, no phone, and no job. It felt as though I had lost some vital part of myself. My shoulder yearned for the weight of my laptop bag, the security of my iPhone 14 in my jacket pocket. I would have to dig out the old one and see how many phone numbers I still had that would be any use to me. I felt a new frisson of fear mixed with panic. When the news of my redundancy filtered out, would the headhunters contact me? How many companies would have a job for a woman my age? And what would Nick Crane say if he was asked for a reference? A man in my position would be able to trawl round contacts at his club, the old boys' network gearing up at top speed, non-executive directorships falling at their feet like confetti. How would I talk to people if I didn't know their phone number and they didn't know my new one? I still had a stack of other people's business cards somewhere, perhaps in my desk at home. I would have to buy a new laptop, too. My personal one had been stuck in a drawer for months. It had never been the same since Jack knocked a glass of wine over the keyboard. And, oh God, what would my mother say when I told her I'd been made redundant? I could just imagine her expression, sitting in her chair in the bay window, holding court over all the other residents. She'd enjoyed a lot of kudos off the back of my success in business. What would my son think? What would Jack say? Nothing helpful, I was sure. Our friends, old work colleagues. The prospect of telling them all was ghastly. Before today, I'd felt invincible, capable and valued. Now I realised I'd probably been an obvious target. I was over 60. I had been expensive. I'd probably been near the top of the redundancy list right at the moment that excess had been cherry-picked by that cheesy, punting American company. 3 months' salary, a golden goodbye, and, in case I decided to steal company secrets or contacts, straight onto gardening leave. What a joke. I didn't have a garden. I didn't even have a window box. I had a convincing but artificial rubber plant in the corner of my living room and some silk roses in a bowl on the landing. My gardening was little more than a quick flick over with a duster. I rested my head on the taxi window as the crowded streets flew past. I'd been due to fly to Oslo in 2 days to speak to a room full of self-important people. The following week I was booked into a 5-star hotel for a corporate dinner to celebrate the deal. I'd bought a new outfit too, a long hand-beaded dress from Alexander McQueen. I hadn't eaten any carbs for a month because of it. I hadn't ever been unemployed, not since I'd left university. Even while I was at school, I'd had Saturday jobs. I just couldn't get my head around it. What on earth was I going to do with my time?
"Sue them," Jack said that evening. "Take them to the unemployment tribunal. You didn't make any mistakes. You never upset anyone. You could screw thousands out of them. No warning, no discussion, and dragged out of the building as though you were a criminal is humiliating and degrading."
He was sitting comfortably in his favourite armchair, one leg crossed over the other, one foot bobbing, a glass of 18-year-old Macallan in one hand. "I have 3 months' salary and they've agreed to pay me an extraneous payment for the Olafsson deal," I said.
Jack scoffed. "Chicken feed. Get on to that solicitor friend of yours. Bill, what's his name?"
"I can't. I don't have his personal number anymore."
"Well, just ring the office," Jack said impatiently. "Are we eating this evening or not? I worked through lunch. I know I said I would try and get away early and pick something up, but you know how things are. Step out of the office for an hour and you miss things. I'll be out of the loop in no time."
"Thanks for that comment. So sensitive of you," I said, knocking back my gin and tonic.
"No good going over it, Clover. It's done now. It's not my fault. Is there any food in the place, or shall I phone for something? You'll never guess what happened in the office this afternoon. This'll make you laugh. Remember Cameron Wallace, tall bloke with glasses and a Lamborghini? He was telling me—"
I looked over at him rabbiting on and felt a sudden, unexpected bolt of anger towards him. We'd been together for nearly 6 years, matched in our success and drive, and yet there he sat, comfortable in his Ralph Lauren casual wear, drinking whiskey and ignoring my feelings. I would have thought he would have spared me one evening to talk and commiserate, but no. As usual, we were straight on to hedge funds, arbitrage and net market exposure, as though nothing had happened. No wonder his wife had left him, if this was how he reacted to her difficulties. The feeling that I didn't like him at all, that I didn't even want to be in the same room as him, was growing. "This is the worst day of my life," I blurted out in the middle of his story about how clever he had been. Jack blinked at me. "It'll pass, Petal," he said at last. "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Shall I order Thai?" He pulled out his phone and dialed our local restaurant, placing the order he always did. I sat there, wondering if perhaps killing him would make me feel stronger. I could almost imagine luring him out onto the balcony with the pretext of a red arrow fly past or a street brawl, and watching him plummet 12 floors. Or perhaps it would be more satisfying to bludgeon him with his whiskey bottle. No, then I'd definitely be arrested for murder. The perfect end to a perfect day. "Here in 10 minutes, he said, pleased. "By the way, Petal, you haven't forgotten I'm going to be away for the weekend, have you? Off to Bonnie Scotland for golf with wee Alistair and Raj first thing tomorrow morning." I tried to ignore his irritating take on a Scottish accent. "Of course I haven't forgotten. And don't call me Petal." "I can't wait. It's going to be enormous fun. The boys on tour again. We've booked a car to take us to the airport. If we'd known you were free, you could have taken us. Never mind, it's too late to change it." He looked over at me and perhaps realised the depth of his insensitivity. "It'll probably be good for you to have a few days on your own. Get your head round things. You've always sailed through everything. I can see this must be a shock." "I haven't sailed through things. I worked hard. I was meticulous. I have the spreadsheets to prove it." He wasn't really paying attention. "We'll be back late Sunday evening. You could get some food in before then, too. There never seems to be anything in the freezer but vodka. You might like to knock up something for when we get back." "What a treat for me," I said waspishly. "Perhaps I could iron some of your shirts, too." "Don't do that," he said absently as he topped up his whiskey glass. "You don't do them properly." I sent him a hard look. "You really don't care that this is the worst day of my life, do you? That I'm sitting here going absolutely crazy with what happened to me today, and all you can think about is food and a whiskey-swilling weekend with your foul-mouthed friends?" "Of course I care," he said, offended. "But you'll be fine." "How? How will I be fine?" I spat. "You could just retire," he said. "You're 61. You're old enough for a bus pass." That was a joke. "Calm down. You're financially secure, healthy. Your son will probably give you a grandchild soon. That'll distract you." "Ben lives in Vancouver. How exactly am I to offer to babysit?" "Look, you're one of the most organised people I know. We'll work something out," Jack said. The buzzer sounded. "Ah, there's the food. I'll go down and get it, shall I?" "Unless you think it's something I should do, you know, to start filling my time," I said. Jack got up, his eyes alight. "There's bags of money in consultancy. Now that's a brilliant idea. You know, everyone knows you. I bet you could get a few people on board. I'll bet there are others who would like to leave excess, or people who've been chucked out just like you." So I round up all the rejects and try to make a thing out of it. "Are you quite sane?" Jack shook his head. "That's not what I meant, and you know it.
Come on, Clover. This isn't like you.
I am dying here, I cried. I was assured, heaven knows how many times, that everything was going well. Once the Olafsson deal was done, I'd be invited onto the board. That I would be a director when Howard Leeming left. That nasty oaf Nick Crane lied to my face on at least 3 occasions. And once in an email. And then he has the gall to call me up to his office like some sort of intern and hand me this damn thing. I shook the manila envelope at him, and some sheets of paper fell out. Advice, helplines, a leaflet for the Samaritans. My eyes filled with tears, a mixture of anger and self-pity. I found a tissue in my pocket and blew my nose. I didn't think I had ever felt so alone. Jack hesitated, his hand on the door handle. The buzzer sounded again impatiently.
I'll just go down and get the food, and then I'll be back and we can have a nice meal together and talk it through. You might like to open a bottle of wine, okay?
He trotted off towards the lifts, the door swinging closed behind him, and I sat biting a thumbnail and wondering about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And then I remembered Nick Crane's shoes, and I was angry all over again. But at the same time, I almost felt like laughing. We didn't enjoy a nice meal together that evening because I didn't feel much like eating anything. I sat on my side of the table fiddling with my old mobile and being irritated and occasionally angered by Jack diligently chomping away opposite me. He worked his way through his Thai green curry, some prawn toast things and most of the roast duck, and then had a go at my Penang and noodles while I picked at a few oddments. I gave monosyllabic answers to his questions, and he didn't seem to notice. We went into the kitchen with the dirty dishes, and I pulled another bottle of his favourite Chablis out from the wine chiller. He watched me open it and pour 2 glasses. I may not have fancied the food very much, but I did fancy the wine, and I knocked back quite a lot that evening. Half of the first bottle and most of the second. It didn't help as much as I'd have liked, but it did dull the pain a bit. Perhaps this is what I would do with my retirement. Drink too much. I want to go on holiday, I said at last when there was a break in the conversation.
What do you mean? You want to go on holiday? Why?
I need a break away from all this, I said. Jack looked at me, his face creased with incomprehension.
I can't just swan off on holiday now, he said. I'm right in the middle of stuff. Important stuff that's going to make me a lot of money if the dominoes fall right. I had a real breakthrough today. I was really cooking on gas. Everything was going brilliantly. In fact, I'm hoping next week we'll see some real progress. You'll have to leave it for a few weeks.
I don't want to. I turned to look at him, sitting in his expensive clothes, his hair brushed sleekly back from his broad, intelligent forehead. He was a very handsome man, it was true. Well-educated, successful, just muscular enough to be attractive. I could still remember why he had appealed to me, how he had won me round with his sparkling blue eyes, his easy charm, and his grand gestures of opera tickets, birthday parties on the Thames, Christmas in Verbier. We'd had a lot of fun to start with, and he spent most of his time at my apartment, just going back to his occasionally when he needed some different clothes, when friends of mine came to stay, or when he wanted to enjoy some me time. This was generally to meet up with his buddies from work, drink designer beer and stay up all night watching American golf tournaments from Augusta or California. But now that this had happened, I doubted we had anything in common to hold us together. So far that evening, it had seemed unlikely.
Where would you go?
He said at last, taking a sip of his wine. I don't know, I said. I need a break from this blasted place. We went back into the sitting room.
How can anyone need a break from London?
He said, genuinely puzzled. I don't know, but I do, I said. He sipped his wine thoughtfully, his eyes on the flickering gas fire with its poncy, annoying white pebbles. He sighed heavily.
I was going to arrange something later on, in May, as a surprise, he said at last. I thought Mexico again, or New York.
I don't want a surprise. I don't want to go to Mexico or New York, I said. I want to go somewhere beautiful and gentle and healing. Jack finished his wine and topped up his glass.
Then I could find somewhere with a spa.
How sexist of you to think that all I need is a week in a spa when my career is going down the pan. He sighed.
Look, I can tell this whole miserable business has really shaken you, but my advice is get yourself straight back out there, networking, using your contacts, dropping the facts, the news you are available into the right ears. Don't waste your time feeling sorry for yourself. I bet you'll have some of the headhunters on the phone when the news gets out.
I don't have my phone, remember?
Well, perhaps you could email them.
I don't want to.
Oh, don't be so childish.
I'm not being childish, I said through gritted teeth, realizing I probably was. I am devastated, shocked and confused. How would you feel if it was you sitting there with a leaflet from the Samaritans? What the hell am I going to do? All I wanted was some sympathy, not some silly suggestions, and yet more tales about what a great day you've had. Is that too much to ask? You're an insensitive clod sometimes. He looked offended.
I'm sorry you feel that way. But you know I'm not one for encouraging someone else's self-pity.
I never asked you to. I just wanted one evening when you could show me some sympathy, some kindness.
I'm trying to make positive suggestions, he said.
No, you're not. You're just ignoring my feelings, as usual. His eyebrows shot up.
I've always been very sensitive to your feelings. God knows there are enough of them. Perhaps it's your hormones.
You have the sensitivity of a sawn-off shotgun, actually, Jack. Sorry you're not feeling very well. Sorry your father has died. Sorry your car got pranged in the car park. But let's talk about me, because that's all that interests you, isn't it?
There's no talking to you in this state.
Then don't. Don't talk to me. I'm sick of this. Look, Jack, I think it's time you and I called it a day. When you get back from Scotland, I want you to pack up your stuff and move out.
You don't mean that.
Yes, I do. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and stalked off to bed. Chapter 3. The following day, Thursday, it was perhaps just as well that I wasn't going into work because I had a monstrous hangover. I suppose I deserved it, but knowing that didn't help with my mood. I had been hoping Jack would spend the night on the sofa, but no. He sprang out of bed at 6 o'clock as though nothing had happened and straight into the shower in our ensuite. He always made a lot of noise in the bathroom, sinus clearing and coughing. You'd think he smoked 50 a day. Then there was a lot of splashing noises, which meant the wet room floor would be like a driving school skid pad when I went in there. At last he came out, bringing with him the whiff of Armani Privé Indigo and 3 damp towels, which he dumped on the floor next to the washing basket. I lay on my side, looking at the towels and feeling furious. Why? Why would anyone do that? How much more thought or effort was it to actually put them inside it? I suppose he thought the staff would clear up after him, i.e. me. He whistled a few bars of Scotland the Brave. He was obviously in a jubilant mood.
Not up yet, Petal, he said cheerfully. Oh, I was forgetting, you don't have work, do you? Lucky old you. Well, just stay there and enjoy a bit of a lie-in. You deserve it.
I raised my head, about to ask if he would bring me a cup of tea. He looked out of the window to the street below.
The car's here, he said. I'm off then, I've got to get to the airport. Don't worry about me, I'll pick up some coffee on the way, he said, grabbing his jacket from the valet stand by the bedroom door. He swung it onto his arms and adjusted his shirt cuffs. Then he blew me a kiss. Don't get up to mischief. I'll see you Sunday evening. Perhaps you could knock up something simple, like a lasagna."
"Lasagna is not simple," I shouted after him. I heard him bounce his suitcase down the stairs. "I want you to leave," I yelled. Soon after, I heard the front door slam shut. No real mention of the previous evening or of my upset feelings, of the ultimatum I had given him. I felt odd, disconnected with everything, slightly panicky. I lay there and thought about things and took a few deep breaths to calm down. I had a headache and a bad case of morning breath. I needed some paracetamol and a cup of tea. The last thing I wanted was to get out of bed and fetch them, but really there was no alternative. Wearily, I threw back the duvet and pulled on my dressing gown. I stood at the window watching a boat chug down the river. Those men had a job. My day stretched ahead of me. I had no idea how I was going to fill it. Perhaps I should go and tell my mother as a first step. I was used to sweeping into work, doors held open for me. Nina would be there handing me a sheaf of papers with pink post-it notes attached, quietly passing on the gossip and tidbits of news that she thought might be interesting or useful. My head would be buzzing with an adrenaline high. I was respected, I had a purpose, I had a place in the world, and I fitted it perfectly. Well, not anymore, obviously. None of those things. I made tea and looked for painkillers. There was a packet in the bathroom cabinet that I pounced on with relief. Then I realised Jack had done his usual trick of putting the empty box back. Why? Why would anyone do that? It was just about the last straw. I gave a quiet growl of rage because anything louder would have hurt my head, and threw the packet into the bin. About 27 seconds later, the answer came to me. I did need to get away now. Not in a few weeks when it suited Jack. Now, far away, from here, from this flat, from Jack, from the chasms in our relationship that had now widened into a bottomless pit. Soon, if not now, then tomorrow. I couldn't bear to be here, surrounded by all the things that had once made me happy, but now just served to remind me of being on the scrap heap. I needed a proper holiday, the first one I'd taken in years. Well, perhaps that wasn't exactly true, because of course I'd had holidays. But even as I sat on a beach in Cancun, or stood overlooking the ocean in the Seychelles, I knew those places and those holidays had been Jack's choice, not mine. I'd never been the sort of person to just sit around drinking cocktails from hollowed-out fruit, although of course I liked cocktails as much as the next person. I'd never liked sunbathing. I hated trying to read my iPad squinting against the sun, and I loathed lying on a sunbed in a row of other sunbeds with absolutely nothing to occupy my mind. But that was the sort of thing I'd ended up doing because that's what Jack liked. And as he had organised everything and paid for us to be there, it would have seemed ungrateful to complain. He'd generally gone off and booked them as a surprise, and once as a birthday present. But the truth was that he had decided which holiday he liked the sound of, and then booked it in secret so that he didn't have to discuss it with me. His idea of torture was wandering around the streets of a medieval city, visiting excavation sites of ancient settlements, basically anything that involved museums, art galleries, or culture, unless they were the backdrop to a black tie event with a few celebrities thrown in for good measure. Well, this was going to be my choice. My holiday, my thing. For inspiration, I went to look at the row of travel books arranged neatly on the bookshelf, but they too were Jack's choices. I needed something less sophisticated, less trendy, more grounded. But where? I went into the kitchen and opened a few cupboard doors, looking for biscuits now that my carb fast was over. My gaze fastened onto some rusticella d'Abruzzo spaghetti I had bought because it had a beautiful, rather baroque pattern on the tin. I almost closed the door again. Even in an emergency, I couldn't eat raw pasta. Then I stopped. Italy. I liked Italy. I liked the warmth, the pasta, of course, the countryside, the red wine. It was years since I'd been there. I rummaged around in my memory, trying to recall where I'd gone and why. Of course. Over 30 years ago, I'd visited my cousin Zoe Russell, now Zoe Rossi. She'd been getting married to Paolo, tall, dark-haired, smiling all the time. It all came back to me then. That long weekend in the Italian lakes when they got married, Paolo's huge family, all those old aunts and uncles, a celebration, laughter, dancing, vines coiled around the pergolas, a fabulous view over a lake, the mountains in the distance providing the perfect backdrop. That's what I needed. That's what I was going to have. I returned the summer after Casper and I had divorced, and that time I went on my own. 3-year-old Ben had gone to my parents for a week. The guilt and the grief my mother had caused me for years afterwards was worth it. The freedom and the occasion made for a wonderful few days. I could almost remember the feeling. Zoe had visited me in London a few times since then, but why on earth hadn't I gone back there before now? I picked up my laptop. Perhaps I would send Zoe an email explaining I needed a break, asking if she knew of any little rental properties overlooking the lake. I'd suggested going there with Jack the year after we got together, and he had visibly shuddered. The next thing I knew, we were off on a surprise holiday to Thailand. Then impulsively, I picked up my old mobile, which was still charging, and connected to the cable, knocking a pile of unopened post off the worktop onto the floor as I did so. I left it there. Then I went looking for my address book, something I only ever used once a year to write Christmas cards. Zoe, it's Clover. Yes, it's me. How are you? Chapter 4. Why had I been so nervous about telling my 79-year-old mother that I'd been made redundant? It was quite ridiculous. But then she had always been the sort of mother who lapped up the good stuff and preferred not to know the bad. I hadn't told her that Casper and I had split up until the degree NICE had come through and I had engaged a Norland Naddie. I drove into the gravelled car park at Winchester Hall, stepped out and took a deep breath. I found my mother sitting in her room reading, feet up on a tapestry footstool. She turned. "What a lovely surprise," my mother said. "I wasn't expecting you until next weekend." I went over to kiss her cheek. "You're looking well?" She was, too. She'd been stunning in her youth, and now at 79 she still was. Her silver hair was cut into a beautiful bob. Her blue eyes were sparkling and intelligent. She waved me to a chair beside her. "Do you know, I think I need a holiday. It's years since I had a proper trip anywhere. I'd love to fly somewhere, but I'm guessing it's out of the question. I was sure my blood pressure was rocketing last week. It was a wonder I didn't pass out. The locum doctor gave me some new tablets, and he dared me, absolutely dared me, to go to my Keep Fit class. Oh, don't worry. I'm much better now." "That's good news," I said. "I think there's too much salt in the food here. That's the problem. I said to Janine as much. You know her, she's the old woman in the suite next to mine, and she agreed with me." I knew for a fact that Janine was only a year older than my mother, but I didn't labour the point. "We were thinking of starting a petition." "Why don't you just say something?" I said weakly. "Oh, that wouldn't work," Mum scoffed. "You have to put it in writing with these people, otherwise they take no notice. Sometimes it's as though we're just a nuisance to them, to the management." "The fees you pay to live here are astronomical. I would have thought they would listen to what you want," I said. Mum nodded. "You would think that, and you'd be wrong. Janine said she wanted a visit from the chiropodist. She has bunions from all those years of wearing stilettos. Well, it was as though she'd asked for cracked cocaine or a visit from John Nettles. She said the girl, I won't call her a nurse, rolled her eyes so much it was a wonder one of them didn't fall out. Talk about a face crime. I could feel the energy draining out of me by the minute. But otherwise, you're well, I said after my mother had paused for a moment. Well, actually, all things considered, I am. Oh, but what's the alternative? Mum said. I'll be 80 in August, if the Lord spares me. That's a terrible age. It's a wonderful age, I said brightly. Really? How odd of you to think that. What are you doing anyway? Shouldn't you be at work? I thought you had some big contract on the cards. The Swedes. Norwegians. Well, yes, but... Well, I'm not part of that anymore, I said. She huffed a bit indignantly. Don't tell me they've moved you on to sort out something else. I bet they are trying to stop you getting a bonus, aren't they? Well, no, not exactly. It's disgraceful. But typical. Women do all the work, and then at the last minute the men steam in and claim all the credit. No. It's more. You wait. One of that pack of hyenas will be turning up in a new Mercedes next month, crowing about how clever he is. I've been made redundant, I said, blurting it out when my mother paused to draw a breath. Nonsense, Mum said firmly. There was a long pause while the information sunk in. You've been made redundant? She said at last, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. But how? Why? Surely not. I was having tea with Sylvia and telling the new woman Peggy about you only yesterday. Peggy was rabbiting on, showing off about her son, who is some sort of minor official on the council. You would think he ran the United Nations the way she brags. Eleanor, do you know my son is responsible for county-wide recycling? It's really quite sickening. I almost asked if he worked on the bin lorries. Instead, I told her all about you, soon to be a director. That shut her up, I can tell you. I was so pleased. Excess have been taken over by an American company. It was all very hush-hush. I only heard about it the day I was made redundant. My mother rustled about in her handbag, pulled out a tissue and blew her nose. You've broken my heart doing that, she said at last, in a small, tearful voice. How could you? Well, I didn't make myself redundant on purpose. I'm not exactly thrilled about it, I said. I suppose not. Oh, dear. So when did this happen? Wednesday. I was escorted out of the building half an hour after I got there. My mother gasped. No. How terrible. Did anyone see you? Well, of course they did. Lots of people, I said. Her voice dropped to a secretive hiss. You should sue. Sue someone. I wish Daddy was still alive. He'd know what to do. No, I take that back. It's just as well he's not alive. This would have killed him. I sighed. Mum, stop. I'm not going to prison. I just don't have a job. How do you think I feel? This was why I had dreaded telling her. She had always demonstrated a startling lack of empathy when it came to this sort of thing. I remember when Caspar and I got divorced, her only concern was what she would tell the vicar when she next saw him. Well, there must be something you can do, she said at last. No, there isn't. All that education and then this happens. I've decided I'm not going to tell anyone. Not until you have some good news to announce, she said bravely. Not until then. I'm 61, I said. That's the age a lot of people retire. I've told everyone you're 50, she said. I can't have a daughter who is 61. You were a child bride, I said.
I was, she said, slightly mollified. 18. An absolute child. Do you know, my wedding dress had a 20-inch waist measurement, smaller than Princess Margaret's. Yes, you've told me many times.